Stalin, Khrushchev, and Brezhnev are traveling on a train. Suddenly the train stops. The tracks end. Stalin yells, "Shoot the driver!" Well, then they shoot the driver. The train doesn't move. Khrushchev says, "Rehabilitate the driver!" Well, they rehabilitate the driver. The train still doesn't move. Brezhnev sighs, closes the curtains, and says, "Comrades, let's rock the carnage back and forth and pretend we're moving." And that, my friends, is the Russian Federation in 2026. Hello and welcome to the Eastern Border. I'm your host, Kristaps Andrejsons, speaking to you from Pilda, just 22 kilometers from the Russian border. And let me tell you, it's cold. The kind of cold that just doesn't freeze water. It freezes ambition and freezes hope. But here in Latgale, we are practical people. We adapt. Just a few days ago, in the nearby city of Rēzekne, the police made a grim discovery. On the balcony of an apartment block, they found a body, wrapped in a sheet, frozen solid. It turns out that when funeral services are too expensive and the ground is a bit too hard to dig, the Soviet-era balcony becomes a perfectly functional cryogenics facility. It's horrific, yes, it's Rēzekne noir at its finest, but it's also a perfect metaphor for what we're going to talk about today. Because right across that border, just a short drive from where I'm sitting right now, the entire Russian Federation has become that balcony. It's a frozen, suspended reality where dead ideas, dead economies, and dead soldiers are wrapped in a sheet of propaganda and left out in the cold, hoping that nobody notices the smell when the spring thaw comes. Today, we're going to tear that sheet off. We have a massive amount of material to get through. We have some Igor Girkin in prison, screaming about incompetence. We have reports of soldiers welding rusty pipes to vans because the military budget was stolen. We have generals painting fake villages on maps to please Putin. And we have the economic collapse that is finally, after 4 years, hitting the average Russian refrigerator. This is the story of the Republic of Fake. Let's start with the man who started it all, Igor Girkin, the doom patriot himself. He's just sitting in his cell and he's not happy. He managed to smuggle out a series of letters recently and they're absolutely dripping with that special kind of venom only a betrayed fanatic can produce. Strelkov is watching the news about Venezuela. You might have seen this. The new Venezuelan leadership, the fact that they might cut a deal with the United States, effectively ending the Chavista regime overnight. And Strelkov looks at this and he looks at Ukraine and he loses his mind. He writes with palpable jealousy about how the United States might solve the Venezuela problem in one night. One night! Meanwhile, he says the, quote, conditional Moscow, end quote, has been trying to denazify Ukraine for 4 years. 4 years of blood, mud, and humiliation. He lists them out like a shopping list of failures. Syria, Libya, Sudan, Nagorno-Karabakh, and now Venezuela. He says while the Kremlin puffs its cheeks and talks about being a great power, its allies are being picked off one by one. He mocks the Russian officials who think they can trade Venezuela for Ukraine. He calls it Homeric stupidity. He says, quote, "You think you can trade spheres of influence? You have no influence left to trade." He points out that while Moscow dreams of grand geopolitical chess, the enemy is bombing Russian cities in the rear, killing officers in Moscow, and sinking ships. Strelkov is the voice of the realist imperialist. He wants the empire, but he hates the emperor, because the emperor is naked. He sees clearly that the time of troubles isn't coming, it's already here. But nobody is listening to him. They are too busy building digital prisons. And that brings us to the frontline reality. While Strelkov screams from his cell, the soldiers on the ground are living in a slapstick comedy directed by a sadist. We have a report from the Z channel Fighter Bomber, usually a reliable source for pilot news, but lately a chronicler of the absurd. He posted a text that reads like a script from a dark sitcom. It describes the creation of a mobile anti-drone unit. On paper, in the Kremlin's reports, this is a high-tech unit. In reality, it's a disgrace. The Ministry of Defense says, create a mobile group. The generals say, we have no people. So they grab cooks, wounded pilots, and the space infantry, which is just a fancy name for ground crews who shouldn't be holding rifles. Then they ask for vehicles. The answer? Here's a broken Ural truck from Soviet storage and a defective loaf van. They ask for weapons. The answer? Here are some machine guns. Build the turrets yourselves. Here are the blueprints. Get welding. So you have these soldiers driving vehicles with no brakes, navigating using offline maps on their personal phones because they have no secure comms. hunting high-tech drones with machine guns duct taped to the roof of a Scooby-Doo van. And the cherry on top? When they ask for help, the Ministry of Defense says, well, it just isn't on the budget. But do you know what is in the budget? Roskomnadzor, the censorship agency, just requested 2.27 billion rubles to build AI systems called Oculus and Vepr. Oculus and Wild Boar. These are AI systems designed to scan the internet for forbidden content and points of informational tension. Just think about the allocation of resources. They don't have money to buy radios for the men protecting the border from the drones. They don't have the money to buy brake pads for the trucks carrying ammunition. But they have $20 million to build a digital wild boar that will hunt down Z-bloggers who complain about the lack of radios. It is the perfect closed loop. The soldier dies because he has no equipment. The blogger writes, our soldiers are dying because they have no equipment. The new AI system will detect this as discrediting the army, and the problem will get banned. The problem and the blogger just disappears. It's magical. The general reports to Putin, everything is fine, morale is clean, the internet is clean. And meanwhile, back at the unit, the commander is screaming at the soldiers not because they failed to shoot down the drone, but because their logbook was filled out in blue ink instead of black ink. I'm not making this up, this is from the report. A colonel with dementia running around the trenches demanding to see the safety briefing logs while the unit is under fire. Brings to mind the Battle of Tsushima in 1905, where the Russian fleet sailed halfway around the world to fight Japan. They were so incompetent, they mistook British fishing boats for torpedo boats and attacked them. They stored coal on the decks until the ships were visible for miles, and when they finally arrived, they were annihilated in an afternoon. The colonel demanding blue ink in the logbook while drones buzz overhead? Well now, that is nothing but the spiritual successor to these admirals. He's polishing the brass on the Titanic while the iceberg is already in the lounge, ordering a drink. This is the digital wall that they are building. A wall not to keep the enemy out, but to keep reality out itself. They're spending billions to automate the lie, because the truth is just too expensive to fix. But you can only hide behind the digital wall for so long before the roof caves in. And as we will see, the roof isn't just leaking, it's on fire. If the early episode was about the hardware being fake, rusty vans and duct tape machine guns, well, let's talk about the software now. And by software, I of course mean the rotting brains of the Russian general staff. We are entering virtual reality. Here's another Soviet joke for you. Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and Napoleon are watching a parade on Red Square. Alexander looks at the tanks and says, if I had those chariots, I would have conquered all of Asia. Caesar looks at the rockets and says, if I had those catapults, I would have ruled the world forever. Napoleon looks at a copy of the Pravda newspaper and says, if I had a newspaper like this, nobody would have known I lost at Waterloo. Michael Naki, another source of mine that I watch quite often, did a brilliant breakdown of this recently. We have reports that General Gerasimov and Defense Minister Belousov are now running a war that exists entirely in PowerPoint. And not just any PowerPoint, but a fantasy version of it. We have leaked information about how these maps are being made, that they're using over there. It looks like a lethal game of a broken telephone, to be honest, played by people who are terrified of being shot. Here is the chain. A lieutenant on the ground knows that a village, let's say Kupiansk-Kozlovy or something of that sort, is still held by Ukraine. He tells his major, well, and the major thinks if I report that we failed, I won't get my bonus. So he colors a little bit of the map red. He tells the colonel. The colonel thinks, if I report that we only took the half village, I won't get my promotion. So he colors the whole village red. By the time this map reaches Gerasimov's desk in Moscow, the Russian army has captured the village, the next town over, and is marching on Kiev. Gerasimov shows this to Putin. Putin is happy and gives a brand new speech unconnected to reality about glorious liberation. But, well, then reality intrudes. The Z-blogger looks at the map, looks at the window, and sees the Ukrainian flag. And the system panics. This is why you see official Ministry of Defense reports that say things like, quote, the enemy is attempting to infiltrate the liberated village with sabotage groups. No, they aren't infiltrating it. They never left. You liberated it in Photoshop. And, this is another callback of Russia's history. We all know the story of Prince Potemkin building fake cardboard villages along the Dnieper River to impress the Catherine the Great in 1787. He wanted to show her a thriving empire where there only was mud. Well, Gerasimov has finally modernized the tradition and internalized it. He has upgraded the Potemkin village to the Potemkin.jpg. It's the exact same fraud, pretending a wasteland is a paradise to keep the monarch happy, but instead of cardboard and serfs, they use pixel and telegram bots. Catherine would be proud. The resolution is a bit higher, but the lies are just as flat. And it gets even more specific. Minister Belousov recently stood in front of a map and claimed that he captured a place called Malaya Tokmachka. Analysts looked at this map. He had placed the village 15 kilometers away from where it actually sits on the face of the earth. He literally moved the geography of Ukraine to fit his victory speech. Or take the Oreshnik missile strike. The Ministry of Defense proudly announced they destroyed a factory repairing F-16s in Lviv. They claimed they wiped out a strategic target. The reality? Ukrainian experts went to the site. The missile hit an archive. The only thing it successfully demilitarized in air quotes here, was a complete collection of the works of Vladimir Lenin. They spent a multi-million-dollar hypersonic missile to blow up their own idol's books. It's a feedback loop of doom. The lie goes up the chain, becomes official policy, and then orders come back down based on the said lie. Well now, since we already took that village, advance to the next one. But they can't, because the first village is full of Ukrainians, with machine guns. So they die, and the cycle repeats itself. And it's not just the military, it's the political elite too. Yana Poplawskaya, you might remember her as the actress who played Little Red Riding Hood back in the Soviet days, now a fierce Z-patriot. She finally snapped. She posted a rant exposing the upcoming Duma elections as a farce. She found out that there are massive bot farms being hired now to write comments saying, quote, "Oh, our deputies are working so hard," end quote. She exploded. Just like everyone else in Russia and around in these parts, she called the parliament Gosdura, the state fool. Listen to her exact words. Quote, "Some deputies sat out their pants for 4 years, and now they decided to tell us what good fellows they are. But the vast majority came there precisely for status, for the deputy crust. To solve personal issues, lobby for interests, to solve their personal little deeds and amuse their ambitions." End quote. And what triggered her? That's the best part. A deputy named Razvorotneva told Russians to stop complaining about the snow and, quote, "grab a shovel and clean it yourselves," end quote. That is the new social contract in 2026 Russia. You pay taxes, you send your son to die for a fake map, and when the street is full of snow, the government tells you to shovel it yourself because they stole the money for the snowplows. And then they hire a bot to tell you that shoveling snow builds character. And speaking of missing things, we have a mystery. A royal mystery. Yes, I'm of course going back to Adam Kadyrov, the crown prince of TikTok, the 16-year-old who collects medals like Pokemon cards. And we're of course carrying on from the previous episode when we spoke about the serious car accident. Now, formally, when Kadyrov sneezes, 10,000 bots post health to the lion. But for 5 days, silence. No posts. No threats to the West. Instead, we have some new flight logs. An Emercom flying hospital, the same one that he was taken to from Grozny to Moscow, and if you haven't checked out that episode, please do. But this time, the very same An-148 jet with intensive care modules did a frantic loop. Moscow to Dubai, Dubai to Grozny, Grozny back to Moscow. Why? Well, the leading theory is that they flew Western specialists into Dubai, or maybe even flew Adam out. Because, let's be honest, if your son is dying, you don't trust the hospitals in Grozny, even if you own the whole country. You sort of want the hated Western medicine at that point. It feels like 1916 all over again, doesn't it? You have the sickly Tsarevich, the crown prince, hidden away from the public eye. You have the frantic, secret attempts to heal him, while the empire just burns to the ground. Back then they relied on a bearded mystic named Rasputin. Today they rely on a Swiss surgeon flown into Dubai on the private jet. The technology changes, but the panic of the ruling dynasty remains the same. When the entire system is built on one bloodline, a single car crash, or a single hemophilia bruise can bring the whole house of cards just down. And then we had a interesting slip-up. A cousin of Ramzan Kadyrov, Muhammad Ali Kadyrov, posted a comment on Instagram that gave the game away. He wrote, quote, "May Allah grant you both a long and healthy life. Live for us and may we not see your grief." End quote. May we not see your grief. You don't say that to someone who just had a fender bender. You say that when things are really bad. Silence is deafening. It shows the fragility of these fiefdoms. The moment the physics engine of the real world interacts with the virtual reality of the untouchable dictator and the system just freezes. They don't know how to handle vulnerability. They can delete comments, they can ban bloggers, but they can't ban a car crash. And they certainly can't ban the truth no matter how much money they spend on Oculus and Vapor. And here's yet another Soviet joke for you. I've heard you like these, so I decided to put some more in this time. Quote, "A young pioneer asks his father, 'Dad, is it true that under full communism, money will be abolished?' The father sighs and looks at his empty wallet. 'Yes, son, of course it's true. And if you look at our family, it seems that we already are living in communism.'" But speaking of handling reality, over here at the eastern border, we're trying to do our part. If you want to help real people on the real ground, please check our charity campaign with Car for Ukraine. It's called Christmas Tree Trucks 2025. We're raising trucks to get vehicles to the guys in the front line who actually need them. Not the virtual trucks on Gerasimov's map, but real trucks for real heroes. Links in the show description, and please go and check it out. And if you want to support the show and keep me supplied with coffee and antidepressants, join our Patreon. You get ad-free episodes and my eternal gratitude and some other benefits like Evita, reading you Latvian and Estonian fairy tales. Well, Estonian are upcoming soon. Oh, by the way, and if you donated to the Car for Ukraine, drop me an email at theeasternborder@gmail.com and, we'll send you these as well. Also, you can wear your doom with pride. Check out our merch store for t-shirts, hoodies, and other gear. That's theeasternborder-shop.fourthwall.com, so you can look it up. Finally, a quick technical note for our YouTube viewers because this causes some confusion. We have cleaned up the channel structure. If you're looking for the podcast episodes, the audio-only stuff, you will find them in the podcast section or playlist. These are auto-uploaded directly from our RSS feed. However, if you want the actual video content, the vlogs, interviews, streams, the stuff like this right now, where you can see my face and the visuals we talk about, because I also now record these while, with my face and the camera and everything, then you can look for the Eastern European Gonzo section over there, and then you can actually, see me talking as well. But if you just want the audio, then the podcast section is just for that. And you can easily tell which is which by looking at the description of the video. If the description looks a bit weird, automated, or generic, you're probably in the audio-only segment. Or you can just check if it says the Eastern Border Podcast playlist, then that's going to be the audio-only one. If it looks like I wrote it at 3 a.m. with a specific purpose, you are in the video section. So, Gonzo for the video, podcast for the audio. Simple as that. And now back to the show. Now, let's stop looking at the maps and start looking at the fridge. Because, as much as Gerasimov might want to, you cannot eat a PowerPoint presentation. For years, the Kremlin has maintained a very specific social contract, a separation of powers. The army fights the war, the Tsar thinks the big thoughts, and the people go shopping. But that deal is dead. The war has finally come home, not in the form of missiles, but in the form of an empty shelf and a bankruptcy notice. Here's a nice little Soviet joke for you again. A customer walks into the Soviet grocery store. "Do you have any meat?" "Oh, no. "Well, do you have any milk?" "Oh, no. "Do you have any bread?" "Of course not." The customer walks out furiously. Shopkeeper then turns to his assistant and says, "What a maniac! But what a memory." See, we have a report from Izvestia, a pro-government newspaper, mind you, that reads like an obituary for the Russian service sector. In 2025 alone, 35,400, I repeat, that's 35,400 catering businesses were liquidated in Russia. That's a 10% jump in closures compared to the previous year. And we aren't talking about little shawarma kiosks in the middle of nowhere. We're talking about the giants. Rostchiks, the state-approved clone of KFC, closed dozens of spots. Shokoladnica, the coffee chain you see on every corner, is shutting down massive amount of locations. A popular bar chain with the ironic name Darling, I'll Call You Back also just went bankrupt. I guess nobody's calling back because they've mobilized. But my personal favorite irony is a bakery chain that completely left the market. It was called Khlyeb Nasushny, daily bread. You literally cannot try this stuff better than reality does. Russians have lost their daily bread, while the government spends billions on AI censorship systems. Why is this happening? Well, because the war economy turns out to be a vampire. It sucks the labor force dry, sending the men to the trenches and the smart men to Georgia. And it sucks the money out of the system to build tanks that get blown up 3 days later. We found a clip from the channel called News of the Superpower that perfectly illustrates the micro level of this disaster. A woman is standing in a grocery store holding a receipt, shaking with rage. She bought a bit of trout, some mandarins, some cottage cheese, and a piece of larger cheese. That's it, a snack. The bill? 3,000 rubles. That's $30 for a snack. She's screaming into the camera over there. This is fucked up. Is this stability? And she's right in the sense, because this is stability. The stability of the grave. That reminds me of another classical joke from the late Gorbachev years. A pessimist and an optimist are discussing the Soviet economy. The pessimist holds his head in his hands and cries, "Oh God, it's so bad. We have hit rock bottom. It can't possibly get any worse." And the optimist smiles brightly and says, "Don't worry, comrade. It can. It definitely can." But if you think the micro level is bad, the macro level is a horror show. Both Naki, on another show of his, and Maxim Katz, and of course my friend economist Igor Lipsitz, well, they all have been crunching the numbers from the late 2025, and it turns out the entire infrastructure of the Russian state, well, is finally completely rotting from the inside out. Take Russian railways, RZD. This is the circulatory system of the Russian economy. The trains don't move, Russia doesn't exist. RZD, dear comrades, is effectively bankrupt. They have 4 trillion rubles in debt. They have entered what the economists call a death spiral. It works like this. RZD has a massive debt, so they raise tariffs on cargo to pay the interest. Because the tariffs are too high, companies stop using trains and switch to trucks. Because the cargo volume drops, RZD loses more money. So what do? Correct, comrades. They raise the tariffs again. It is, of course, suicidal. They're killing the very thing that keeps the country alive. Soon, there's going to be nothing else left to really kill. And it's not just the trains. Let's look at the regions. We're seeing a cascade of regional defaults. We aren't just talking about poor regions like Tuva. We're talking about the rich ones. Tyumen, the heart of the oil industry, is running a budget deficit. The Saratov region is practically in default. The federal government had to forgive 12 billion rubles in debt just to keep the lights on. And Gazprom, the national treasure, it has turned into a national parasite. It's a black hole. It used to fund the budget. Now the budget has to fund it. They lost the European market, they are selling gas to China at a loss, and now they're talking about raising gas prices for Russian grandmothers to cover the losses of their geopolitical genius. So what's the solution? What does the Russian government suggest? Nothing, of course. They suggest patience. But Professor Lipsitz, one of the really few honest economists out there, gave some advice to his Russian audiences, because, he works in Russian and then posts everything on YouTube. And he gave some advice that actually chilled even me to the bone, even harder than Ludgall Winters. He wasn't talking about buying stocks or gold for people. He was talking to people living in modern high-rise apartment blocks in Moscow and in St. Petersburg. He told them to buy burjuikas, those primitive wood-burning metal stoves from the Civil Era. His logic is terrifyingly sound. He said, quote, "The heating infrastructure is going to collapse. There is no money to fix the pipes. The communal services are bankrupt. When the heating grid fails in January, nobody's coming to save you. Put a hook in your ceiling, lift a heavy stone in your apartment, and stick the pipe out of the window. Because winter is coming, and Gazprom is broke." Think about that image for a second. A modern skyscraper in a city that claims to be a capital of a superpower, with smoke chugging out of hundreds of little wood stoves sticking out of the windows because the great empire cannot keep the water warm. That's the economic reality of 2026. The Republic of Fake can print all the money at once, but it cannot print warmth. It cannot print bread, and it cannot print a functioning railway system. The facade is crumbling, and what's behind it is cold, dark, and very, very expensive. So, at this point we have established the scene. The army is fighting with rusty vans. The generals are drawing fake maps. The economy is collapsing, and the people are buying wood stoves for their high-rise apartments. The natural question, the question any rational person would ask, is why? Why does it continue? Why do the people shovel their own snow and eat their $30 cheese in silence instead of asking questions? Yet another Soviet joke for you. I've put a lot of them in this time since, like I said, got a lot of requests, and finally that ticket came due. Quote, a foreign journalist asked a Soviet factory worker, how much do you earn? 200 rubles. And how much is a pair of shoes? 300 rubles. But how do you survive? The worker just shrugs. We have a deal with the state. They pretend to pay us, and we pretend to work. Vladimir Grubnik, a hardline pro-war volunteer who calls himself the ghost of Novorossiya, gives us the answer. And honestly, it's one of the most insightful things a Z Patriot has ever written. He calls it the Great Patriotic Apathy. He looks at the Russian society and he despairs. He says the special military operation has now lasted as long as the Great Patriotic War. Again, how they call World War II. But unlike back then, nobody cares. He wrote this brilliant, damning sentence, quote, we live in a paradoxical time where some are glad to be deceived and others are glad to deceive. End quote. Think about that, glad to be deceived. He explains that the people actually want the virtual reality. Because if they admit the map is fake, if they admit the king is naked, the psychological weight is too much to bear. Again, Russia is a religious experience. And admitting your own fault, well, that's something of a cultural taboo over there. They would have to admit that all is fake and that their sons died for nothing. They would have to admit that the cold in their apartment isn't a temporary glitch, but the permanent future. And that's, of course, too scary. So they close their eyes. They turn on the TV. They listen to the reports about how they're winning. They embrace the apathy because apathy, to them, feels safer than the upcoming terror. And I don't blame them. This is pure Leonid Brezhnev. We're back in the era of stagnation, but with more explosions. Back in the 70s, everyone knew the shoe factories produced boots that fell apart in the rain. Everyone knew the 5-year plan was a fairy tale. But as long as there was a sausage in the fridge and, no one got shot, they all clapped at the party congress anyway. The difference is, today, that the fridge is totally empty and the people are getting shot. But the instinct remains. Sit quietly, nod at the TV, and maybe the state won't notice you. It's the survival strategy of a turtle on a highway. But what does this winning actually look like? Maxim Katz recently did a breakdown of what he calls the negative value victory, and it destroys the entire logic of the war. He points out the devastating truth. When Russia wins a battle now, when the bots cheer and the generals get their medals, what have they actually acquired? Take Mariinka. The Z channel celebrated its capture for months. Mariinka used to have 10,000 people. Do you know how many residents it has now? One, a single woman named Galina. Russia spent thousands of lives to capture Galina. Or Bakhmut, for example, the city of 1,000 roses. It used to have 70,000 people, factories, a winery. Now? Well, now, zero. It's a moonscape. Or Popasna. Used to have 20,000 people. Now, maybe 200 desperate souls living in cellars. Katz argues, correctly here, that Russia is not capturing territory. It's capturing liabilities. It's conquering graveyards. These aren't assets. These are piles of radioactive concrete, unexploded ordnance, and minefields. To make these places livable again would cost billions of dollars. Billions that Russia doesn't have. Because, as we discussed, RZD is bankrupt, restaurants are closing, Gazprom is unprofitable, and so forth and so on. So the grand strategy of the Russian Federation in 2026 is this. Destroy your own economy to fund an army that fights with rusty vans, to capture a city that no longer exists, so you can put a flag on a pile of rubble and tell a population that doesn't care that you have won. It's a machine that converts blood into dust and money into noise, and as long as everyone agrees to pretend that the map is real, the machine keeps running. And finally we have the reaction from the people who are supposed to be the biggest cheerleaders of this war. the Z community, the Turbo Patriots. Let me just add another joke here. A man asks Armenian radio, what is a horizon? Radio Armenia answers, a horizon is an imaginary line that moves further away the closer you get to it. The man asks, and what is communism? Armenian radio answers, please do not mix geometry with politics. You would think they would be happy. Gerasimov is painting the map red, factories are churning out tanks, even if they're made out of cardboard, and the opposition is crushed. But no. I found a brilliant summary of their mood from a source called Vot Tak. It describes the current state of the Z community as New Year's depression. They spent the first weeks of 2026 waiting for Putin to speak. They wanted him to come out and wave the nuclear club. They wanted him to threaten the United States over the Venezuela crisis, over the Greenland dispute, over the seizure of Russian tankers. Yet another blow to the Russian economy, by the way. And what did they get? Putin came out and mumbled something about respecting the United Nations Charter. The disappointment was crushing. One Z blogger, philologist in ambush, wrote, quote, it's an endless attraction of breaking through the bottom. They told us paper tigers don't exist. Well, turns out paper bears do. End quote. Even Vladislav Poznyakov, the leader of the male state, a man who usually has the nuance of a sledgehammer, posted a meltdown. He wrote, who ends up being our ally? Who's our enemy? I'm fucking confused. Can someone explain what's going on? End quote. When the fanatics are confused, the ideology is dead. But the most damning thing comes from the frontline reports. We talked about the fake maps earlier in this episode, but turns out the lies, well, they're all getting lazy. General Gerasimov, Minister Belousov, and General Kozuvlev all stood up recently and officially announced Kupiansk is fully under Russian control. The Z bloggers, including the guys actually fighting there, looked at this announcement and, well, collectively lost their minds. The channel Roman of Light just screamed, this does not correspond to reality even close. Kupiansk hasn't been under our control for a single day. End quote. Oleg Tsarev, the traitor Ukrainian politician who usually licks the Kremlin's boots, couldn't help himself too. He wrote the most sarcastic post of the year. Quote, it is good that we have General Gerasimov. Photos, videos, and soldiers say all one thing, but we only believe him. It is good that he is the one reporting to the president. End quote. And the channel, Two Majors, explained what liberation actually means in 2026. They wrote, quote, in official reports, liberated means physically destroyed by artillery and turned into a gray zone, where nobody can live. End quote. So there you have it. The final synthesis. The Republic of Fake isn't just lying to us. It isn't just lying to Putin. It is lying to itself about the very nature of victory. They aren't fighting to capture cities. They're fighting to turn cities into gray zones on a map so a general can get a medal, while the economy burns, the soldiers weld rusty pipes to vans, and the patriots sit in their cold apartments wondering why the paper bear is on fire. And that brings us back to where we started. To the balcony in Rezekne, to the cold wind in Pild. From here, 22 kilometers from the border, the Republic of Fake looks terrifying, yes. It has missiles, it has tanks, it has Vepr and Oculus. But when you look closer, when you read the letters from the prisons and the telegram posts from the trenches, you see what it really is. It's a tragedy of errors. A funny hologram projected over a graveyard. They can paint the map red. They can ban the word war. They can even tell you to shovel your own snow because the money is gone. But they cannot ban the laws of physics. They cannot ban the price of cheese. Then they cannot ban the truth that is slowly, painfully, breaking through the cracks in this digital wall that they have built. And again, if you want to help the people who are actually fighting that wall, the people facing the real tanks, not the paper ones, please remember our friends at Car for Ukraine. See, while the Russian army welds rusty pipes to loaf vans, we're sending real reinforced trucks to the Ukrainian defenders. You can find the link in the show notes and help us put some real steel in the front line. And here's the final Soviet joke for today. Armenian radio gets asked, what are the possible solutions to the current crisis in our country? Radio Armenia answers, there are two solutions. One is realistic and the other is fantastical. The excited man asks again, okay, what's the realistic one? Radio Armenia answers, aliens arrive and magically fix everything for us. The man, then confused, asks yet again, and what is the fantastical one? And Radio Armenia answers, we decide to finally stop stealing in our country and fix everything ourselves. I'm Kristaps Andrejsons. Keep your wood stoves ready, keep your eyes on the horizon, and remember, happiness is mandatory, but heating is optional. До свидания, товарищи.